Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko tēnā hima hana ki a koutou. Nō he au, ko ai au. Ko uru ao te waka, ko aruhura te awa, ko te hua te maunga, ko aura ki te maunga ariki, ko paunamu te taonga, ko pautini te taniwha, ko te huru te tangata, ko papakura te wahine, ko aruhura te marae, ko Ngāti Waiwai te hapu, ko pautini ngai tahu te iwi. Ko mirihere reka pikaka, rātou ko herehini meihana, ko morihu pāka, o ku tūpuna whaia. Ko Sonja herehini Macfarlane tōku ingoa, noa aruhura ahau. I'd like to talk a little bit about my haerenga, my journey, and I'm really grateful to so many people who have supported me along my journey. My real focus, I guess, has always been in education and also psychology, but starting in education, my father being a primary school teacher, teaching me all through my primary school years. Growing up also with a sibling who had a congenital disability had a big impact on me throughout my education journey. And growing up as Māori in a community where being Māori back in the day wasn't such a safe thing to be, these things have all transpired to shape my haerenga, my journey. So I ended up getting into teaching and taught for many years, and then got into itinerant teaching, working as an RTLB for some years. I've always had that calling towards disability and inclusion. So I ended up working at the Ministry of Education, Special Education, it was called then, but now it's Learning Support, working as an advisor and then moving into psychology. After a few years there, I started work at the University of Canterbury, where my research journey really began, I suppose. And I wanted to delve into some of the issues that I'd faced as a practitioner in the field. Worked a lot in Te Rangaho, the Māori Research Lab at the University of Canterbury, where the real focus there was on Māori advancement across dimensions of education, psychology, counselling and health. A few years ago, I was made a Fellow of the New Zealand Psychological Society, which was a real honour. And I then decided after many years in academia that I'd like to go back to the Ministry of Education in an advisor role, just to see how well the research that was being done out in the field for Māori was having an impact. Was it really being drawn on? Was it making a real difference? So I went back to the Ministry of Education for a couple of years in a Pahukia Huria Māori lead role. And then the call back to academia was strong. So I've moved back into academia and now working at Massey University. So what have been the areas of my focus? Mātauranga Māori is at the core of everything I focus on, but in specific terms more around culturally responsive evidence-based practices, because I learned years ago that the term evidence-based and effective are not necessarily synonymous terms. So I wanted to unpack why do the evidence-based programs that were brought into Aotearoa New Zealand from other countries not having the impact or working as well for our Māori tamariki rangatahi and whānau. I also have a passion for te tiriti o Waitangi and the importance of upholding the principles and now the articles that are encapsulated within the tiriti o Waitangi. I've also had a big focus on head, hand and heart, mātauranga, tikanga, kaupapa, and realising that many professionals have the heart and the will, but they need the tools in their hand. And then that makes a big impact on their heart. So crafting tools and strategies for professionals and practitioners has always been at the core of what I've been doing. Reducing disparities for tamariki and whānau and focusing on potential and strengths, that's the lens I love to come in from. I've always had a loyalty to my ukai pō, where I come from, acknowledging that, and a real desire to be someone who can serve the people with whom we work. So some of the rauemi or resources that I have had great joy in creating, there are 5 at the top there. The Cultural Enhancement Framework, which is based on the analogy of the marae, particularly the whare nui, using aspects of that to frame how people view programs and how they draw on research. For example, the matapihi represents the lens that we look, the lens we adopt. The marae is a safe place for people to share their thoughts and feelings. So there is that framework is used like a template to run over programs to sort of audit them, I guess. Te Pikinga Ki Runga is a treaty-based framework, which is based on the principles of the Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and with that comes a suite of tools that can support practitioners with reflective prompts and questions to shape culturally responsive programs for children who have challenges. He Ringa Whai Mōhio is an evidence-based practice framework based on the concepts of tika, pono and aroha, tika being the research, is it tika or culturally grounded and authentic. Pono is about the practitioner's skill, their cultural competency and their interactions being reasoned, just and fair. And aroha is about enabling whānau voice so that their views and their participation is part of the kaupapa. I've created a cultural competency potama, which scaffolds practitioners and professionals up 3 levels of competency from mōhiotanga, the desire to engage in new learning, mātauranga, the encountering of the new learning, and maramatanga, the integrating and application of new learning in their practice. And the journey to tino rangatiratanga is an extension of Te Pikinga Ki Runga, where a suite of tools attached to the middle domain of protection, which is all about the well-being of tamariki, rangatahi, and the whānau. Those resources that I've dropped in there, the references there, are about publications I've made over a few years that I'm really proud of being a part of doing. Some book chapters, some articles, etc. there that have been focused and draw on the work that I've done, and from that research has emerged some of these tools that I've talked about. I feel my journey so far has been based on an obligation and the privilege of caring and serving. I feel very strongly about the kaupapa, the research and practice communities, care and serving and working within these, te taiao, the environment, and looking after te tangata, the people. I'd like to acknowledge the colleagues who have opened doorways for me over the years and have worked with me and beside me to support me on my journey. In closing, I'd like to acknowledge my whānau, the support I've had through many years from my parents, my children, my husband, Angus Macfarlane, my brothers and sisters. I'd also like to mihi to my hapu and my iwi who've always supported me. My research communities, particularly the participants who've engaged in the research, who've given their knowledge and their koha, I guess, to us. They gift their knowledge to us, and we can't do our work unless we have communities that we can talk to and gather research from. My friends and my colleagues along the way, mihi nui kia koutou katoa, and of course, the Royal Society of New Zealand, Te Aparangi. I'd like to close my kōrero with a whakatauki. E hara taku toa I te toa takitahi, engari e toa takitini. The success is not the work of an individual, but the work of many. And in closing, once again, I'd like to thank all the other fellows in Te Aparangi and all the colleagues who helped me along the way. E mihi nui kia koutou katoa.